Ethan Ward woke before dawn, as he often did lately. Not from an alarm, but from something quieter, an unease that had settled deep in his chest. It wasn't a sound that woke him, not really. It was the absence of one. No soft breathing beside him. He turned, blinking into the half-light. The sheets on her side were cool. Claire wasn't there. At first, he thought maybe she was in the bathroom. Or maybe she couldn't sleep again. She'd been restless lately, claiming stress from work, deadlines, new clients. But the more he listened, the clearer it became. The house was silent. The kind of silence that hides something. Their old dog, Murphy, stirred in the corner, sighing heavily. Ethan rubbed his eyes and swung his legs over the side of the bed, wincing as his feet hit the cold floorboards. Charleston's winter mornings were damp, the air thick with salt even this far inland. Through the curtains, a faint orange shimmer marked the harbor's edge. He checked his phone. 5:47 a.m. No texts. No missed calls. Then, as if cued, headlights swept briefly across the window. Tires on gravel. The sound of the front door opening quietly, too quietly, and then closing again. She was home. Ethan stayed where he was, listening to her keys drop softly onto the hall table, the faint shuffle of her boots being removed. "Claire," he called finally. There was a pause. Then her voice, gentle, too gentle. "Hey. Sorry, didn't want to wake you. Where were you?" A small laugh. "Couldn't sleep. Drove down to the pier. Watched the sunrise." He frowned. "At 5 in the morning?" "Yeah." She appeared in the doorway now, her hair windblown, cheeks pink from the cold. She was wearing her running jacket, though there wasn't a hint of sweat on her. Her eyes met his for a moment, then darted away. "It helps clear my head." Ethan smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "You could have woken me. I'd have come. I needed to be alone." That word hung in the air. He wanted to ask more, why her hair smelled faintly of cologne, not her own perfume, why her voice trembled just enough to sound like she'd rehearsed the excuse, but he didn't. Instead, he nodded and said nothing. Because the truth, even if it was whispering right there in the silence, was something he wasn't ready to face. The Wards had lived in that house on Rutledge Avenue for nearly 7 years. It was an old 2-story place with peeling white paint and a porch that sagged just enough to make guests smile and say, "Has character." Ethan was a high school history teacher at Porter God. Claire was a real estate agent with one of those sleek black sedans and a phone that never stopped buzzing. On paper, they were the kind of couple that Charleston society adored, respectable, attractive, social enough to host oyster roasts and attend fundraisers, but never flashy. But paper burns easily. Over breakfast that morning, Ethan watched her from across the table. She sipped coffee absent-mindedly, scrolling through her phone. The gold band on her finger caught the light. "You working today?" he asked. "Mhm. 2 showings downtown. Then lunch with the team." He nodded, buttering his toast slowly. "You've been working a lot lately." "Yeah, the market's insane. Everyone wants a piece of Charleston right now. I barely see you anymore." She looked up briefly, smiled, but her eyes were somewhere else. "It's just a busy season, babe." He didn't push it. But when she left, and the door closed behind her, he noticed her phone charger still plugged in by the couch. She'd forgotten it, a rare mistake. When he went to pick it up, he saw a text flash on her screen before it locked itself. "Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you." The sender's name was just a letter, A. Ethan froze, phone in hand. For a moment, everything, the ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even Murphy's soft breathing, seemed to fade out. Then came the denial. Maybe it was a client. Maybe it was some joke. Maybe. He set the phone back exactly as he found it. The house suddenly felt too small, too quiet. Outside, the wind rustled the live oaks, and a train whistle moaned somewhere across the marsh. Ethan rubbed his hands over his face and whispered to no one, "Don't do this to me, Claire." A week later, Ethan saw him. He was sitting in the corner booth of a coffee shop on East Bay, the kind of place Claire liked to work remotely from. Ethan had stopped by unexpectedly, something told him to. The man was tall, early 40s maybe, dressed in a navy suit that looked tailored. His hair was neat, but there was something smug in the way he leaned back, coffee cup in one hand, phone in the other. And across from him, Claire. Laughing. Her hand brushed his arm lightly. Ethan watched from the sidewalk for a long time, heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. Then she looked up, and saw him. Her smile faltered. The man followed her gaze, turned, and their eyes met through the glass. Ethan didn't storm in. He didn't make a scene. He just stared for a beat, then turned and walked away. That night, she didn't come home until nearly midnight. "I saw you today," he said when she finally came through the door. Her face went pale. "Ethan. You were with him. Who is he?" She hesitated, swallowed. "He's just a client." "Then why did he look at me like that?" Her mouth opened, but no words came. She confessed halfway. Not the whole story, never the whole story, but enough to stop his questions. His name was Aaron Keats, a developer from Atlanta who was investing in Charleston properties. Claire met him last spring through work. They clicked. It started with long lunches, then weekend trips, 4 viewings. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said softly, eyes rimmed red. "I didn't plan it." He laughed bitterly. "Nobody ever does." They sat in silence, the ceiling fan humming overhead. "Do you love him?" Ethan asked finally. She hesitated just long enough. "No." He nodded, as if the answer mattered. But when she reached out to touch his hand, he flinched like she'd burned him. After that, things changed, but not how either of them expected. They didn't separate immediately. There were logistics, the mortgage, Murphy, the routines of 2 lives so tangled that even anger couldn't fully untie them. Ethan slept in the guest room. Claire moved through the house like a shadow, cooking, working, pretending. Sometimes, they talked like nothing had happened. Sometimes, they didn't speak for days. And sometimes, when the coastal storms rolled in and thunder shook the windows, Ethan would catch her staring at him from the hallway, eyes full of something between guilt and longing. He wanted to hate her. He tried. But there were still moments, the smell of her shampoo lingering on his pillow, the echo of her laughter in some old voicemail, that made him ache for what they'd been. Then, one afternoon, Aaron showed up. Ethan came home from school to find a silver BMW parked in the driveway. Inside, the two of them stood near the kitchen island, talking in low, urgent tones. Aaron turned when Ethan entered, his expression measured. "Mr. Ward," he said coolly. "Didn't expect to meet like this." Ethan's voice was calm, too calm. "Get out of my house." Claire stepped between them. "Please, Ethan. Now." Aaron held up his hands, smirking. "Fine. But this conversation isn't over." When he left, the silence that followed was heavier than before. Claire looked like she might collapse. "He can't come here," Ethan said quietly. "Not ever again." She nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. "I know." But later that night, Ethan saw her on the back porch, phone pressed to her ear, whispering. A month passed. They tried counseling, once. It didn't help. The therapist kept saying words like communication and rebuilding trust, but Ethan could tell Claire's heart wasn't in it. One evening, she didn't come home again. Her car was gone, her phone went to voicemail. At midnight, Ethan drove. He didn't know where he was going until he saw the silver BMW parked by the pier. She was sitting in the passenger seat, head resting on Aaron's shoulder. He sat in his own car for nearly 10 minutes before he could breathe again. When she came home later, he didn't confront her. He just watched her move through the kitchen, humming softly, acting like everything was fine. Something inside him, something that had once been patient, forgiving, snapped. The next morning was calm, deceptively so. The air smelled of salt and magnolia. Ethan made coffee, as usual. Claire came down, hair still damp from her shower, wearing that soft gray sweater he'd bought her years ago. They talked casually. He even smiled. When she reached for her mug, she paused. "You're being nice today," she said warily. He shrugged. "Maybe I'm tired of fighting." She smiled faintly, relieved. They sat on the porch together for the first time in months. The tide was high, gulls circling lazily overhead. "I've been thinking," she said finally. "Maybe we should separate for a while. Just, take space." Ethan nodded slowly. "I think you're right." He stood, walked to the railing, staring out at the water. His voice, when it came, was quiet. "Did you ever plan to stop seeing him?" Claire said nothing. He turned, and their eyes met. That was the last thing she remembered before everything went dark. When the police came 2 days later, they found Ethan sitting on the porch, still in the same clothes, staring at the marsh. Claire's car was gone. Her phone, her purse, gone too. He told them she'd left after another argument. They searched the area for weeks. Nothing. No trace. People whispered, of course. In Charleston, secrets always float to the surface eventually. Some said she ran off with the developer. Others said she drowned herself. Ethan never denied either story. He just kept teaching, mowing the lawn, walking Murphy by the water every evening at dusk. And sometimes, when the tide rolled in and the air smelled of salt and rain, he thought he could hear her voice carried on the wind. A year later, a hurricane swept through the Carolina coast. After the storm, they found a piece of a woman's bracelet tangled in the marsh grass behind the Ward house, silver, engraved with the name Claire. Ethan never claimed it. He sold the house 2 months later and left Charleston without saying goodbye. Some nights, in some nameless town inland, he still wakes before dawn. Not from a dream, but from that same uneasy silence. And sometimes, in the half-light, he swears he can still hear the sound of tires on gravel, and a door closing softly behind her. Charleston had changed in a year. The new houses gleamed like polished shells, tourists filled the cobblestone streets, and the marshes smelled of rain and salt. But some things, the ghosts, the whispers, never left. When realtor Mara Jennings got the listing for the old Ward house on Rutledge Avenue, she didn't think much of it. The file said, "Vacant property. Previous owners moved out. Water damage on lower level." But when she first walked through the door, the air felt wrong. The place was quiet, but not empty. Dust hung in the sunlight like suspended breath. The floors creaked under her boots. On the kitchen counter, she found a chipped mug, still half full of something long dried, and a man's reading glasses. In the back, the porch overlooked the marsh, still scarred by the last hurricane. The tide was high again, whispering through the reeds. And then she noticed it. A small silver object wedged between the boards, half buried in mud. It was a bracelet. The engraving read, "Claire." Mara's stomach twisted. She'd heard the story, of course. Everyone in Charleston had. The teacher whose wife disappeared. The police who found nothing. The husband who sold the house and vanished. She pocketed the bracelet and told herself it was nothing. But that night, she couldn't sleep. Because every time she closed her eyes, she saw the porch, and thought she heard the faint sound of water dripping inside the house. 2 weeks later, Ethan Ward came back. He wasn't supposed to. Not according to the papers. He'd sold everything, left no forwarding address. But one foggy morning, the neighbors saw him standing by the gate, staring at the house like it was a grave. He'd aged, beard rough, eyes hollow. He rented a small room above a bait shop near Shem Creek and said little to anyone. He didn't visit old friends. Didn't call family. But every evening, he walked back to that house. Just stood by the fence. Watching. "Why'd you come back?" the shop owner, Joe, asked one night, pouring him coffee. Ethan shrugged. "Guess I've got unfinished business." Joe nodded slowly. "That storm took more than roofs, you know. Some things never washed away." Ethan looked up, eyes dark. "I know." Mara ran into him on a Tuesday afternoon. She was there to photograph the property for the listing. He was already inside. "Excuse me, sir," she called out nervously, standing in the entryway. Ethan turned, startled but calm. "Sorry. I used to live here." "Oh. You must be," she hesitated. "Mr. Ward." He smiled faintly. "Just Ethan now." She relaxed slightly, lowering her phone. "I didn't think anyone still had a key. I made one before I left." His voice was distant. "Couldn't stay away." They talked for a while. She found herself drawn to his quiet sadness. He told her about teaching, about losing things you didn't mean to lose. She told him about her own divorce, how the city made it easy to hide behind work. Before she left, he said softly, "This house has a heartbeat. If you stay long enough, you can hear it." She laughed nervously. "That's creepy." But that night, she dreamed of the house, water rising beneath the floorboards, whispering voices echoing through the walls. A few days later, city contractors came to repair the damaged pier behind the property. While clearing debris near the marsh edge, they hit something solid. Not wood. Not stone. A shape. By the time the police arrived, the workers had unearthed enough to see it clearly, a skeleton wrapped in remnants of fabric. A bracelet still clasped to its wrist. News spread fast. The name Claire Ward returned to every front page in Charleston. They called Ethan in for questioning, of course. He didn't run. He just sat across from Detective Reyes, hands folded. "Mr. Ward," Reyes said carefully, "you told us your wife left town." "She did," Ethan replied quietly. "Her body was found 50 feet from your back porch." He nodded, emotionless. "The tide must have brought her back." Reyes studied him for a long moment. "Is that what you believe?" Ethan's eyes lifted. "It's what she would have wanted." The coroner's report was inconclusive. The body had been in the water too long. Cause of death, undetermined. The story divided Charleston again. Some said he killed her. Others said she fell. A few whispered that Claire's lover might have returned that night. But Ethan said nothing. Except to Mara. He found her again one evening, standing on the porch as the sun went down. "You believe in ghosts?" he asked. She laughed lightly. "You mean like spirits?" "No," he said. "Like memories that never die." He handed her something, a photograph. It was old, water-damaged, taken years ago. A woman laughing beside him on that very porch. Claire. Mara looked at the photo, then back at him. "You loved her." "I still do," he said softly. "But love changes shape. Sometimes it becomes something else." "What did it become for you?" Ethan's gaze drifted toward the marsh. "Punishment." That night, another storm rolled in from the coast. The wind howled through the live oaks, rain slamming against the old house. Mara, unable to sleep, returned, something drew her there. When she stepped inside, lightning flashed, and for a split second, she saw a woman standing by the porch door. Wet hair clinging to her face. Eyes dark, empty. Mara screamed, stumbling backward. The figure vanished. Moments later, Ethan appeared, drenched, standing in the doorway. "You saw her, didn't you?" Who was that?" Mara gasped. He smiled faintly. "What the tide took, it never gives back completely." Lightning lit up the room again. The sound of waves crashed impossibly close, too close. Outside, the marsh water had risen to the porch steps, higher than ever before. "Ethan," she whispered, "we have to leave." He shook his head. "No. I've been waiting for her." The floorboards groaned beneath them. A cold wind swept through the open door. In the next flash of lightning, the house was empty. When the storm cleared, rescuers found the Ward house half submerged. The porch had collapsed, the marsh swallowing its foundation. No one found Ethan's body. Only two things remained in the debris: a man's wedding ring and a photograph of a couple, water-stained but still visible, smiling on a porch long before everything fell apart. Some say the tide took him, too. Others say he finally found her. Now, when the storms return to Charleston and the water rises over Rutledge Avenue, locals swear they see two figures standing by the ruins of that porch, hand in hand, staring out toward the sea. And if you listen closely, you can hear the whisper in the wind. Every secret leaves a trace, even when the tide tries to wash it away. The city smelled of mud and brine for weeks after the storm. Charleston always cleaned up beautifully, historic charm and quick paint jobs, but the marshes never forgot. The tide left its signature everywhere: gray waterlines creeping up house foundations, streaks of salt crusting the windows, and in the air, that faint metallic scent of something not quite alive, not quite gone. Mara drove past the ruins of the Ward house almost every day. The porch was gone completely now, the back half of the structure leaning like a broken jaw. The city planned to demolish what remained, but part of her didn't want it touched. She couldn't explain why. Maybe guilt. Maybe fascination. Sometimes, at dusk, she'd park across the street and just watch. The marsh water shimmered with sunset light, and for a moment, it looked peaceful again. But she always left before full dark. Because after sunset, the place changed. You could hear it. The faint slosh of something moving below the reeds, a low creaking as if the house still breathed. And once, she could swear she heard laughter, soft, female, rising with the wind. A month after the flood, Detective Reyes called her in. "We need to talk about Ethan Ward," he said. They met in a small cafe near King Street. The detective looked tired, his jacket still smelling faintly of smoke and rain. "You were the last person to see him alive, right?" Mara hesitated. "I think so. We talked at the house before the storm." "What did he say?" She thought about it carefully, the way his voice had sounded that night, calm but hollow. "He said he was waiting for her." "For Claire." Reyes sighed. "We found something else at the site. A lockbox buried under the porch. Belonged to him." "What was in it?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Letters. Dozens of them. Addressed to Claire. Never sent." Her pulse quickened. "What did they say?" Reyes shook his head. "We're still cataloging them. But one line stuck with me." He flipped open his notebook, reading aloud. "The water remembers everything, Claire. Every word we said, every lie you whispered. And one day, it'll speak." 2 nights later, Mara couldn't stop thinking about that line. She drove back to her office, logged into the property archive database, and found an audio note attached to the original listing, something recorded by Ethan when he first put the house up for sale. She clicked play. Static. Then his voice, low, slow, weary. "If someone's listening, this house isn't what it looks like. There's something underneath it. The tide runs deeper than you think." Then, a faint splash. And a woman's whisper. "Ethan." The recording cut off. Mara froze. Replayed it 3 times. Each time, the whisper was there, clearer, closer. She leaned back, heart racing. The rational part of her mind said it was a glitch, background noise, maybe an old message Claire had left. But the other part, the one that woke her up at 3 a.m. thinking about the smell of salt and old wood, knew better. The house wasn't done with her. The dream started again. She was standing ankle-deep in water inside the ward house. The wallpaper peeled in strips, the floorboards swelled and cracked. Outside, the tide pressed higher against the walls. And across the room stood Claire, eyes black, skin pale as bone. "Why did you take it?" Claire whispered. Mara looked down. She was holding the silver bracelet. "I just found it," she tried to say, but her voice wouldn't come out. Only the rush of water filled her throat. Then Claire smiled, a slow, sorrowful smile, and pointed to the window. The tide had risen to the glass. When Mara woke, her hands were damp. The next morning, she drove to the police station and handed over the bracelet. "I shouldn't have kept this," she said to the desk clerk. "It belongs to the case." Reyes came out to meet her, nodding. "You did the right thing." But as she turned to leave, he said quietly, "Funny thing, though. We already have that bracelet." She froze. "What do you mean?" "It was recovered with the body." Mara stared at him. "Then what's this one?" Reyes frowned, lifting it from the evidence bag. "Looks identical. Engraving and all." He paused, lowering his voice. "Where exactly did you say you found it?" She swallowed. "On the porch." Reyes exhaled slowly. "Miss Jennings, that porch was underwater for months. By early spring, demolition finally began. Mara drove out one last time, unable to stop herself. The workers had cordoned off the property, machinery growling in the background. She stood near the fence, watching the excavator tear into the rotted walls. Dust and salt filled the air. Then one of the men shouted, "Hey, over here." They'd hit something beneath the floor, something buried under the foundation. Mara's stomach twisted as the crew cleared mud and debris. It wasn't bones this time. It was a box, metal, sealed tight, rusted but intact. The foreman pried it open with a crowbar. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Some old, some new. Every single one taken from the same spot, the porch, at different times of day. Always the same 2 figures, Ethan and Claire. But the last photograph was different. It was dated 3 weeks after the storm. And in it, Ethan was alone. Standing on the porch. Smiling. Behind him, barely visible through the glass reflection, was a woman's silhouette, thin, dripping wet, hand resting on his shoulder. That night, Mara sat in her car by the waterfront, the box beside her. She couldn't stop staring at that final photograph. In the reflection, the woman's eyes seemed to follow her. She whispered to herself, "You're not real." But the wind off the harbor answered with a low, mournful sigh. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. A voicemail, from an unknown number. She hesitated, then pressed play. Static again. Then Ethan's voice. "Mara, don't fight it. The tide keeps what it loves." Then silence. Then the sound of waves. By dawn, she was back at the ruins. The site was fenced off, the machinery still. Mist drifted over the marsh like breath. She climbed the fence, boots sinking into wet sand, and walked up to where the porch had been. The tide was coming in fast, lapping at her ankles. The water shimmered strangely, almost luminous. And then she saw them. 2 figures, walking hand in hand across the shallows. Ethan and Claire. Their faces calm. Their shapes flickering like reflections. Mara stepped closer. The water rose to her knees, her waist. The salt burned her eyes. She reached out. And felt a hand, cold as the sea, take hers. When the demolition crew returned that afternoon, they found Mara's car parked by the fence. Keys in the ignition. Driver's door open. No sign of her. Only wet footprints leading toward the marsh, ending at the water's edge. And there, half buried in sand, was a silver bracelet, engraved with a new name, Mara. Charleston rebuilt again, as it always did. The Ward property was sold to a developer, the marsh drained, a new home rising on the old foundation. But the workers complained. About whispers at night. About doors that opened by themselves. About the sound of a woman's laughter on the wind when the tide came in. Locals have a saying now, passed quietly among those who remember the story. The water doesn't take. It remembers. And on foggy nights, if you stand by the harbor and listen, you might hear three voices now, soft, intertwined, fading with the tide. 6 years later, the house was new again. Painted in clean coastal whites, trimmed in pale blue, with a wide porch that faced the marsh. You'd never know what had been there before. The real estate brochures called it, a fresh start in historic Charleston, where the tide meets tradition. Tom and Rachel Whitaker moved in that August with their 7-year-old daughter, Lily. They'd come from Atlanta, chasing the same dreams so many others had, slower days, sea air, a place to heal after too many city years. Rachel fell in love the moment she saw it. It feels alive, she'd said to the agent. Tom had laughed. Let's hope not too alive. The price was low for a reason. The first weeks were blissful, long breakfasts on the porch, walks to the market, Lily chasing fiddler crabs through the reeds. The marsh glittered gold at sunset. Everything felt right. Until the noises began. It started small, a drip behind the walls, a soft creak upstairs. Old houses had their sounds, Rachel told herself. But then came the whisper. It happened late one night, when Tom was away on business. Rachel lay in bed, half asleep, when she heard it, faint, like someone speaking through water. Lily. Her daughter's name. Rachel sat up, heart pounding. Lily, she called softly. No answer. She rushed down the hall to her daughter's room. Lily was asleep, the window open to the humid night. But the whisper came again, closer now, just beneath the floorboards. Don't let the tide take her. Rachel slammed the window shut. The next morning, she went exploring, part curiosity, part nerves. The house had a small crawl space under the new porch, sealed with a wooden hatch. Something about it bothered her. When she pried it open, the smell of salt and decay hit her immediately. The space was dark, damp. She shone a flashlight inside. There, wedged against the foundation, was something small and metallic. A box. Inside it, wrapped in water-stained paper, was a single photograph, faded but still clear enough to see. A man and woman standing on an old porch. The same spot where Rachel now knelt. The back of the photo read. Ethan and Claire Ward, 2017. The tide keeps what it loves. Rachel stared at it, feeling the hairs rise on her arms. She'd heard that name before, Ward. The story the agent brushed off when they bought the property. When she looked up, Lily was standing in the doorway. Mommy, the little girl whispered, there's a lady outside. Rachel ran outside. The marsh shimmered in the noon heat. At first, there was no one. Then she saw her, a woman in white, standing ankle-deep in the tide, long hair moving with the wind. Too far to see clearly, but close enough that Rachel's breath caught. The woman lifted her head. And smiled. Rachel blinked, and the figure was gone. Tom didn't believe her, of course. You've been reading too many ghost stories, he said, though his voice had a nervous edge. But that night, as they unpacked boxes in the study, Rachel found an old leather journal hidden behind a beam. Its pages were warped, ink blurred from water damage, but some lines were still legible. The first entry. March 4th. She says the house remembers her. She says the water speaks when it rains. I told her not to go back to the marsh. Signed, Mara Jennings. The later entries grew more erratic. April 2nd. The tide line moved higher last night. I saw them again, Ethan and Claire. They're not angry anymore. They're waiting. April 6th. If anyone finds this, tell the next family to leave before the water turns silver. That night, the sky broke open. Thunder rolled across the bay, wind slamming against the house. Rain battered the porch, flooding the yard. Lily woke screaming. Rachel ran to her room and found her daughter standing by the window, pointing outside. "The lady's calling me," she cried. "She says I have to go." Rachel grabbed her shoulders. "No one's there, baby." But she looked, and froze. Through the lightning, she saw the figure again. Standing in the marsh. Arms outstretched. The same woman. But this time, two others stood beside her, a man and another woman, their hands joined, faces turned toward the house. Ethan. Claire. Mara. And behind them, the tide rose fast. The floorboards groaned. Water began seeping up through the cracks. Salt water. Rachel lifted Lily into her arms and shouted for Tom, but her voice drowned beneath the roar. The lights flickered. Then, the whisper returned, this time inside her head. "The water remembers. Don't run." She stumbled toward the front door, wading knee-deep now. But when she opened it, there was no street, no grass, just endless dark water. And in the reflection of that black surface, she saw not her own face, but Claire's. Smiling faintly. Then, everything went silent. When the storm cleared, neighbors found the Whitakers' car still in the driveway. Lights still on. Front door open. No one inside. Only puddles. And on the porch railing, etched faintly in the wood, as if carved by the sea itself, were 4 names. Ethan. Claire. Mara. Rachel. Beneath them, a 5th, unfinished. Only the letter L. Years passed. The property was abandoned again, condemned after repeated flooding. Locals called it the house on Rutledge Avenue. Teenagers dared each other to visit at night. They said if you stood on the porch when the tide came in, you could hear a woman whispering names. Others swore they'd seen a child's handprint on the glass, still wet even on dry days. And every spring, after the first big storm, a silver bracelet would wash up near the marsh. Always engraved differently. Always claimed by the tide before morning. Charleston rebuilt, as it always did, layer after layer of new lives over old bones. Tourists came and went, unaware that beneath the bright colors and charm, the city still listened to its ghosts. On certain nights, when the moon is low and the tide pulls high, the waterline glows faintly along Rutledge Avenue. Locals call it the salt line, the mark left by those the tide chose to keep. And if you walk there alone, you might see them. 4 figures. A man, 2 women, and a child. Standing hand in hand, watching the tide roll in. Smiling. Waiting. Because some stories don't end. They just come back with the water.